Hey there, I'm Ari from the Tech Buyers Guru, and in this video, I'm going to be talking RAM speed. Now, RAM is nothing new to anybody out there, and RAM speeds have always been advertised as something that can really benefit your system. But the big question is, how fast do you need it to be to really max out your system? And this is actually a topic I've explored multiple times. Back in 2014, on my website, the Tech Buyers Guru, I looked at DDR3 RAM, if you can remember that stuff. 1600, 1866, 2133 and 2400. Those were the speeds people were buying, and at that time I recommended actually 2133. Then in 2016 I looked at the first gen DDR4 sticks, 2133, 2666 and 3200, which was considered very fast at the time in 2016. And back then I actually recommended 2666, the reason being that it was more compatible with most motherboards, and furthermore, the price was just a lot better. You paid a huge premium for 3200 megahertz RAM. Well, fast forward to 2020, and two things remain the same. First of all, we're still on DDR4 RAM, and you can still buy 3200 RAM. The big difference is that now 3200 is kind of considered the baseline reference RAM, and in fact, it's the standard speed that all of the latest Ryzen PCs can support. So AMD has made 3200 megahertz RAM, which used to be kind of pie in the sky in terms of speed and in terms of price. It's now kind of the baseline speed. Every Ryzen PC can support that if you're using a Zen 2 or Ryzen 3000 series processor. Now, then the big question becomes, well, can I go higher than that? Do I have benefits? Are there drawbacks? And what I've done is I've rounded up three very popular sticks here at three speeds, and I'm going to be testing these on both the AMD Ryzen Zen 2 platform as well as the Intel Z390 platform using my 9900K processor. And we'll be looking at this DDR4-3200 kit from Corsair. It's their Vengeance RGB Pro RAM. Then we'll be looking at Corsair's Dominator Platinum RGB running at 3600 megahertz. And finally, we'll be looking at this very special Viper Steel kit from Patriot. This runs at DDR4 4000 megahertz. That's about the fastest that you'll find. And while you can find 4400 and up, a lot of times you'll have compatibility issues. That's almost guaranteed. Actually, Corsair just released something at 5000 megahertz and basically it doesn't even work. So I think 4000 is a really good target to look at. I have not tested this yet, I should say that much, but I actually did request 4000 megahertz because I thought, well, that is going to be probably what's most realistic, even though Patriot Viper sells 4400 megahertz and some of the other brands do as well. I just thought that that was going to reach a little bit too high. And actually what's amazing about this kit right here is it doesn't cost that much more than DDR4 3600. So this kit comes in at like 130 or 140 bucks. The 3200 kit over here comes in at about $100. So you're not paying a huge premium. Now you do lose RGB lighting on the Viper Steel kits, and this is part of Patriot's marketing. They basically say, look, if you want the highest speed RAM, we're going to leave off the RGB. They've told me that RGB really does cut into the throughput that they can achieve for their RAM, and they cannot achieve their highest speeds if they include the RGB. You can get RGB RAM from Patriot Viper, but not at their highest speeds. Now, some other manufacturers have said kind of the opposite. I talked to Crucial at CES 2020, and they said, oh, yeah, well, we can do whatever we want. You know, RGB doesn't cut into our speeds, but they also haven't yet marketed a really high-end RAM. So I'm going to go with what Patriot's saying here. I do think that if you're going to look at the upper tiers in terms of memory speeds, you're going to start to see RGB fall off. I've seen HyperX do the same thing. They demoed a DDR4 4800 kit at CES 2020, and that was not an RGB kit either. So just so you know, the first two kits do have RGB, the last kit does not, and that is not an accident. That is, I think, something that you're going to have to pay attention to. So you're going to perhaps have to choose between the aesthetics of RGB and then the top-end RAM speed. But of course, this video is all about whether or not it's right to choose high-end RAM for your system. I'm going to be looking, like I said, at a Ryzen system. I'm going to be using the Ryzen 5 3600X, so that's going to represent kind of a mainstream system. And then I'm going to have my 9900K from Intel, which is going to represent a high-end system. And I'm also going to have two different video cards in the two systems. So they're really going to be targeting two different markets, and I think that's important because if you're building a $1,000 PC versus you're building a $3,000 PC, well, spending a little bit more to get a tiny little bit more RAM speed and a little bit more performance might be worth it in a $3,000 PC, but not so much in the $1,000 PC. So It really depends who the customer is. And that's why I'm going to speak to two different customers out there, two different types of viewers out there. So I will be back to you in a moment. First up, I'm going to show you each of these RAM kits installed. Here's the DDR4-3200 kit from Corsair. This is Vengeance RGB Pro. Of course, it is RGB lit, and I love how the light flows across the top of the heat spreader. I got this in white specifically to match the interior of this case, and I think it looks fantastic. This kit does come in at $100. Moving on to the Dominator Platinum RGB DDR4-3600 kit from Corsair. This kit also has RGB effects. Of course, it uses their special Capellix RGBs. I frankly don't think it's quite as attractive as their simpler Vengeance RGB Pro. This has fancier RGB lighting. It allows for a lot of different patterns that are more addressable. Like here we have Inside Out, which I think is like a heartbeat pattern. I love the way it looks. This comes at $160, and you are paying both for the faster speed and what they consider the higher end lighting effects. Finally, in the spirit of speaking softly and carrying a big stick, we get to the Patriot Viper Steel DDR4-4000 kit. Extremely fast, no lighting. Thank you very much at $130. But now it's time to see if all that memory frequency has anything to do with performance at all. Let's start with our CPU-Z built-in benchmark. This is a really lightweight benchmark. It's really easy to use. It's not particularly precise, but I like to just start with it to set a framework. And what we see here is that on the Intel system, the higher speed memory does seem to have a quantitative effect, particularly jumping up to the 3600. And then on the AMD system, we see something quite opposite. Actually, speed decreases with each increase in memory speed. We're going to return to that theme over and over again throughout these benchmarks. DDR4-4000 does not work on AMD, and I will explain why in a moment. Moving on to a much more comprehensive benchmark suite, Geekbench 4. We see again the Intel system profits from higher speed. The multi-core memory score in particular really skyrockets from 7428 all the way up to 8157, and the overall score does increase as well. Now on the AMD system, we see something a little bit different. When we move up to 3600, yes, we get a performance increase, but then we get a performance decrease with the 4000 memory. And it's odd because the overall score is actually the lowest here. The memory score is somewhere in the middle, but certainly the 4000 megahertz memory is not helping the system all that much. Now, this is the only chart in this review where I'm going to be showing you memory bandwidth. And that's because I think it's a very dangerous and potentially misleading specification to throw around, and yet it's what RAM manufacturers really focus on. If you look at memory bandwidth, you see a steady increase from 3200 to 3600 to 4000 on both the Intel and AMD systems. But on AMD, the latency skyrockets at 4000. And that is why you cannot just look at memory bandwidth. Now, I said I was going to explain why 4000 doesn't work on AMD. It's not that the system crashes. It's that the memory speed is now decoupled from the Infinity fabric. That's the communications system within the chipset to the CPU and vice versa. You do not want to run that decoupled, and it can't go any higher than 3600, or actually specifically 1800, and that's doubled when you're talking about RAM. So the latency skyrockets. It's a bad combination for AMD, and that's why you're going to see over and over again in the charts to follow that DDR4-4000 is a miss on the Zen 2 platform. One last thing I should mention about the AMD system and DDR4-4000 RAM, it could not load at CAS 19, it runs at CAS 20. So that's not a mistake. In my charts, it is DDR4-4000 CAS 20 when running on AMD. Now let's get into the productivity benchmarks. This is Cinebench R20, an extremely popular benchmark. We see absolutely nothing. This is actually amazing, and this is one of the first tests I ran. I said, this review is not going to reveal much, is it? These scores were absolutely not affected at all, despite this being an incredibly intensive CPU benchmark. I thought for sure that RAM would have some impact on the scores. It has 0% impact on the scores. So interesting, Cinebench is not affected by RAM scores, and that does have an effect on all you out there who are doing 3D rendering. V-Ray is another handy rendering benchmark, and here we see that again there's actually not much of an effect of RAM speed. So if you are into 3D modeling, 3D rendering, spending a lot of money on faster RAM won't work on Intel, and specifically it won't work on AMD. we notice a very, very slight jump going up to DDR4-3600 and then a huge collapse at DDR4-4000. It's a big miss here for AMD and DDR4-4000. Now here's a benchmark that's near and dear to my heart. It's the first 5 minutes of 4K rendering of this very video, the video you're watching right now. I perform this only on my Intel system because that's where my work files are. And I found that I actually could decrease that 5-minute render time by 6 seconds. And that's actually fairly significant. That's about 3.7% drop in rendering time. And that means a lot to me. If I'm rendering a 10, 20, 30-minute video, I'd like to get those seconds back. And if I'm doing it every day of my life for work, hey, that means a lot to me. Now, getting that speed increase isn't free, but the DDR4-4000 kit only costs an extra $30 over the DDR4-3200. So if you're into 4K rendering, you ought to be taking a look at faster RAM, at least if you are on the Intel system. Like I said, I did not benchmark this on the AMD system. Now, I know a lot of you came here just for the gaming benchmarks, and now we are finally going to get into those, starting with 3D Mark Time Spy. I break this out not only by the processor, but by the video card as well, because like I said at the beginning, I attempted to balance out the power of the CPU with the GPU to make these realistic. You probably wouldn't run a 2080 Ti on a Ryzen 5 3600X, and that's why I dropped in my GTX 1080 in here. So don't focus too much on the graphics scores. Yes, they're lower when you're running a slower GPU. Focus on the CPU scores. On the Intel system, we see a drop off when we move to 3600, which is a little bit unusual, and then a boost when we move up to 4000. It's a little bit hard for me to explain, but overall, the significance of the results are fairly minor. When we look at the AMD system, we actually see a boost moving up to 3600 and then a big drop off in CPU performance at DDR4-4000 because, as I've already discussed, it doesn't really work on the AMD system. Let's get into some games with Witcher 3. I dusted off my digital copy of Witcher 3 in honor of the Witcher 3 series on Netflix. Witcher 3 is a fantastic game. If you haven't played it, check it out. And it's enjoying a huge resurgence because of the TV show, but the graphics are still amazing. This thing puts any GPU to shame, even the RTX 2080 Ti. It is an amazing game, and the graphics have never looked better. Now, one thing I should mention that is in my gaming benchmarks, I did run the GTX 1080 at a lower resolution, so I'm actually trying to compensate for its lower power and keep the pressure on the CPU, because otherwise you're really not getting much of a test of the CPU's abilities in games. As it turns out in Witcher 3, more than any other game, there is no impact of the CPU or the memory subsystem. It doesn't matter at all. So despite this game being many years old, it still hammers the GPU, runs it at 100%, and the CPU has very little to do with the results. So as you can see here, it doesn't matter what your memory speed is. Although oddly, DDR4-4000 seems to work better on the Ryzen system than anything else. I can't explain it. It's the one anomaly in my results. Moving on to the racing game Dirt Rally by Codemasters. The game engine here is notoriously tough on the CPU, and that's why I thought we'd see some advantage of faster memory. As it turned out, it had no effect on the Intel system at all. We see basically no change in the average. On the AMD system, it goes up quite a bit actually with DDR4 3600. So we can see here there's probably a little bit of a CPU bottleneck when you're running the 3200 RAM, but then we see another drop off with DDR4-4000, so it's not a good overall balance when you're running that higher latency memory, the DDR4-4000 on AMD. Moving on to Battlefield 4, one of my favorite games of all time, and a game I still enjoy playing and still enjoy looking at. The graphics in this game are fantastic considering it's from 2013. This is a single player campaign. It's too hard to benchmark multiplayer and get really repeatable results. What we see here is on the Intel system, you do get a slight increase on the average, and that's actually true also for the AMD system. But overall, I was actually surprised there wasn't more of a CPU bottleneck in this game, given that it's not much of a strain on either of these GPU subsystems. I actually included Battlefield 5 here in the benchmarks as a counterweight to Battlefield 4 because I thought there would be absolutely no effect of memory speeds in Battlefield 5 given that it is such a huge graphics load on any graphics processor, even the RTX 2080 Ti. And yet we see more of an effect of memory speeds here in Battlefield 5 than we saw in Battlefield 4. It's actually producing slightly higher averages, especially a DDR4-4000, I should mention, on the Intel system. And then on AMD, we actually also see a boost going up to DDR4-3600. It stalls out at DDR4-4000, but I would say that this is actually alleviating some of the CPU bottleneck in that Ryzen 5 3600X system. So you've seen the benchmarks. Now I'm going to give you my recommendations, and you better buckle up because this is going to be a bumpy ride. The easiest thing I can do is tell you start with DDR4-3200. It's a good deal. You get great across the board performance on AMD or Intel, no stability concerns at all. You can get a great RGB kit from Corsair like the one I tested for $100. You can save $20 off that price if you go with a non-RGB kit. That's really the sweet spot in terms of performance. $80 for 16 gigabytes of RAM, or about $160 for 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, if you want to get a performance boost and you're running either AMD or Intel, step up to DDR4-3600. You're going to get a performance boost, but it's going to cost you. Now, the Dominator Platinum RGB kit here that I tested runs $160 for 16 gigabytes. That's $60 more than the 3200 kit that I tested. That's a lot of money. But if you're building a complete system and it's a premium system, that extra $60 is going to be kind of a drop in the bucket in terms of pricing, and you will get a boost in a lot of applications. I'd say to 2 to 3% depending on what you're doing. Take a look back at the benchmarks I presented to see if the benchmarks that you would be interested in are really showing the benefit of that 3600 kit. Just be careful, because a lot of manufacturers are peddling DDR4-3600 kits that are complete junk, and that they know that this is the new hotness. And so they're selling kits that are basically 3200 kits rebranded with really weak timings like 18, 22, 22. That stuff is complete garbage. It won't perform at all like what I showed you in the benchmarks in this video. You've got to be a savvy consumer, and you won't find that information on retailer sites like Amazon or Newegg, and sometimes you won't even find it on the manufacturer's sites. Sometimes you have to go download the PDF spec sheet. Sometimes you may even have to call them or email them, and they're probably not going to give you the answers. Frankly, I'm a little disappointed in the RAM industry overall, because there's so many kits out there and it's so hard to find out exactly how they're going to perform. All I can tell you is that this is the real deal at 16, 18, 18, 36. Those are the same timings as the DDR4-3200, so you know that that's a premium kit because they're able to achieve that higher frequency without sacrificing the timings. And that is where I stop for AMD users. If you're an AMD user, maximize your performance with DDR4-3600 and call it a day. Everybody who's on Intel can keep listening. DDR4-4000, this Patriot Viper Steel kit, was incredible. It actually comes in at just $130, so it splits the difference between the two Corsair kits and gets you fantastic performance, again, in applications that scale with memory. Not all of them do, but you will get that boost in some games. You will get that boost in some productivity and content creation apps, and it's only $30 more than the Vengeance RGB Pro I tested. DDR4-4000 with really good timings, 19, 19, 19, 39. Again, there's a lot of stuff out there that's complete junk. If you look for DDR4-4000, try to hunt down those timings. I couldn't actually find anything better than this Patriot Viper Steel kit at anywhere near the price. And yes, I checked G.Skill, which is a lot of people's go-to manufacturer for high-end RAM. They do have DDR4-3600 and 4000 kits, but they do not beat the prices of the two that I tested here if you drill down and look at the timings that they're offering. So frankly, I think Patriot is doing something fantastic with this RAM. And by the way, the kit that I didn't test that I sort of wish I had is their upgraded DDR4-4400 kit. It has the same timings, which is mind-blowing. These are already good at 4000, 19, 19, 19, 39. Their 4400 kit has the same timings, and it's $160. Same price as this kit here. Again, no RGB lighting, but boy, if you're on Intel and you want to maximize the performance of your system, go out and buy the DDR4-4400 kit from Patriot Viper, and you will be pleased. Now, there's one caveat to all of this, and that is, even though as part of the total system cost, these high-end memory kits aren't that expensive, what they are expensive compared to is 32 gigabyte kits. So I'm very much on the fence as to whether most users should spend on a premium DDR4 16 gigabyte kit or just jump up to a DDR4 3200 kit at 32 gigabytes. It's going to depend on your needs, your uses, your usage scenarios. if you know you are frequently filling up your RAM at 16 gigabytes and you have a limited budget, as just about everybody does, allocate that budget to more RAM. I can get 32 gigabytes of this DDR4-3200 stuff for just over $160. That's the same price as 16 gigabytes of that, and that's the same price as, say, 16 gigabytes of the really high-end DDR4-4400 stuff from Patriot Viper. So if you have $160, in that scenario, you're going to have to decide, do I want maximum capacity? Do I want a really good balance of speed and aesthetics with the RGB implementation? Or do I just want to maximize speed and limit my capacity with Viper Steel like this kit here? So ultimately, I can't answer these questions for you. I've just given you the data so that you can go make an informed decision. This video took me a lot of time to produce. I did a lot of research, I did a lot of outreach to manufacturers, and I did a lot of benchmarking. If you liked it, of course, please like and subscribe. Post your comments down below, and I will catch you soon.